for turning up. Thank you all for turning out tonight. I didn't expect this big a crowd. As a matter of fact, I wasn't sure that this topic would be of much interest to anyone, but I'm glad to see those of you who came to see this tonight. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to talk a bit about give a brief introduction to the topic, then we'll see a little video that explains how the design process, how the computer part of the design process works, and how this machine that you see in front of you here works. And after the video, then I'll take you through the process that resulted in some of the earrings that you saw in the hall or that you could see up front here. What I'm going to be talking about then is how my minor hobby, I thought, of 3D printing turned into something of a preoccupation and an unending supply of earrings for my wife. And I think most of you have already seen the display in the hall. This gives some basic information about how these earrings were made, but I want to fill in a lot of the detail tonight on that and show you some additional work that I've done. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Laz will show a little video that shows the software and how the machine works itself. Got interested in 3D printing because it lets me dream up and make things that would be completely impossible for me to make any other way. This earring is an example of my work. You can see that it consists of several small pieces of different colors. What you may not immediately notice about it is that there is wire with a loop at both ends that runs through the earring and holds all the pieces in place. You can think of my earrings as basically beads on a string, with the central wire being the string. But unlike ordinary beads, these beads have unusual shapes and they fit together in interesting ways. I recently bought a 3D printer, but I got started with 3D printing long before I owned one. 3D printers are becoming common, especially in libraries, and our new Kennett Square library actually has 4 3D printers, and it has people that can help you with the software and getting started with the printing process. So it's easy now to get involved in it. I'll show you my 3D printer, but first I want to show you the process I go through to design the earrings. I find design inspiration in all sorts of places, and the earring that I just showed you was inspired by the browns and oranges and stark contrasts of the mesas of the Southwest. So using the tools, the drawing tools in PowerPoint, I created a simplified idea, a simplified image of the desert Southwest as a starting point, and it looked like this. I use a computer-aided design program called a CAD program for short to turn my designs into instructions that the 3D printer can follow. To create the desert earrings in my CAD program, I brought the PowerPoint drawing that you just saw into the software and basically traced over it. But after I had made an initial pair of earrings based on that drawing, I decided the initial design was too narrow. It was not easy to recognize it as a desert scene, so I created a new version that was wider. Let me show you the process for that second version. First, I extended the sketch to make a more recognizable scene. You can see how the blue lines now extend beyond the background image. I then turned off the background a satisfactory flat layout for the earring design, and I began adding the third dimension. I decided how thick to make each part of the earring, starting with the sky. You can see how the design now takes on a third dimension. I made the closer parts of the landscape thicker to provide a sense of the relative distances. And the last step was to add a hole extending through all the beads. That's where the wire will ultimately go. As you can see, there are no colors at this stage. Everything is gray. I'll be printing the various pieces of the earring with different colors of plastic. That's where the color comes in. The design I created in the CAD program contains the precise dimensions of the earring beads, but it can't be used directly by my 3D printer. For that, I have to run it through a program called a slicer, which turns it into instructions for a series of layers that the 3D printer can produce. The output of the slicing process is a set of files, one for each color, that the 3D printer can read. Here's what the layers for the sky bead look like. The sliced file can then be transferred to the 3D printer. 3D printing is a slow process, even if there's only one color. And for multicolored objects, which is what I usually printing, it is slower yet because every time you change colors, you have to change filaments, and that takes several minutes by itself. So for these earrings, it took 10 to 20 minutes for each color, probably 2 hours at least in all. Much faster 3D printers are available, but they are not yet affordable for hobbyists like me. So here you see the final result, along with the components. 5 3D printed beads, piece of wire to thread them onto, and an earring hook purchased from a craft store. I use special jewelry pliers to make the loops at each end of the wire. So that should give you a sense of what it takes to create earrings the way I do. And I hope it gives you a sense of what 3D printing is like. And perhaps you're interested in trying it yourself. The new library facilities make that pretty easy. And the things that you can do with this technology are pretty much limited. So I encourage you to consider giving it a try. Thanks for listening.
Okay, here we are back again. And what I'm going to do now is just talk you through the process I went through in deciding how to make some of the earrings you've seen. And then I'll mention a few that I haven't made, but you can use your imagination what they might be like. So when I, let's see if I can get this to do a page down for me. That won't work. Why won't it work? Okay, now it works. So when I design these earrings, I'm working with a bunch of constraints. And I can't really go much beyond 2 inches because they start to interfere with people's shoulders. Can't go much wider than 3/4 of an inch because they become quite awkward to wear. I'm not fond of 3D printed earrings that are just flat. I do some that are just flat, but I think it's 3D, so why not 3D? I like to have at least some relief in there, and in some of the earrings it gets quite complicated. I like to do multiple colors, but as the video mentioned, each time you change colors, you spend several minutes changing filaments, and so it could get pretty drawn out. So a handful of colors is good, but a half dozen starts to be a problem. And you have to make it practical to assemble. Some of the earrings that I've done have to be assembled using tweezers, and getting everything lined up so the wire will go through can be really tricky. So that limits things on the small side, and also limits the number of pieces that you can really practically use in one of these earrings. About 10 might be the max, and really that's getting to be too big. And another design constraint is that the wire has to pass through each piece of the earring, otherwise it won't hold together. So some designs you might think of that would have stuff out at the edge of the earring just won't work. Some part of each piece has to go through the middle where the wire is, or it won't stay together. And I like to think of them as potentially tiny sculptures. I look at a design I'm working on and I think, well, suppose it were scaled up to, desktop size or monument size or something. Would I still think it was an interesting design? I'm trying for that, sometimes more successfully than others. Let me just show you one more thing about the wire passing through. You can see the earrings on the right-hand side, which were basically initiated as an exercise to see how far off center things could be. And the cylinders here are pretty much the max. If you were to move those cylinders any farther from the center of the earring, the wire would no longer pass through them, they would just fall out. So this kind of shows you what that constraint is. Okay, so how does this work? Well, I start with some idea that it seems interesting to me. And in this case, I started with these painted designs of houses that the Ndebele people of South Africa do. They're famous for this type of painting on their walls. And I thought, okay, let's see, what are the elements here? Well, there's usually symmetry. There's usually black borders, sometimes white borders, but big blocks of color. So what might you do that would be an earring incorporating some of this? Whoop, went by it. Somewhere here, it's going to stop. Okay, that's one too many. There we are. So this was an idea based on that type of painting. So one of my favorite poster designers was a man named David Lance Goines. He died earlier this year. And he often used rows of rounded nested squares. You can see them across the bottoms of these posters and across the bottom of the slide here. And I thought, well, that's an interesting design. Could I do something in 3D that would use that same type of pattern? And so this is that. I'm not quite satisfied with this. I'm going to be reworking it. For one thing, the middle color, which is yellow in this case, gets lost. These are earrings, and from 4 feet away, you can't see that yellow really. It kind of blends in. So I need to modify this design. But anyway, it was an interesting exercise. These have what you call threefold symmetry. All three faces are identical here if you turn it around. These are Navajo rugs from the Two Gray Hills trading area in New Mexico. They're made with dyes from local plants. And I really like the subtle colors that they get, the browns and the grays and so forth. And I thought, well, what can I do with this? And I kind of got something in the right direction, but the problem is I'm very limited in the colors that I can use because there's only a limited number of filament colors available. I have 30 or 40 different colors, but which sounds like a lot, but it's not if you start being fussy about your colors. And so I'm not real happy with the colors, but I think it's okay. Sycamore. I like sycamore trees with their peeling bark. The outermost bark is older and darker, and then the newer bark inside is a lighter color, and the newest, where stuff has peeled away, is white. And it makes these interesting patterns. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do something with that. And I tried a couple different things, but what I ended up with was these, which they have the 3D layering effect, but they don't look much like sycamore bark, but that's okay with me. It's an interesting design. Our family has often gone to the Outer Banks for summer vacation, and when we're there, we like to watch the sunset over the bay. And there's some pictures like that, and I thought, well, what could be done with that? And I tried a few things. The one I liked best was this one. Desert landscape. I like the colors of the desert Southwest, and here's some what some artists have done with that. And I thought I would take this. This is the starting point for the earring that you saw in the video, and the first version, which I mentioned in the video as being too skinny, is here. And then in the video you saw the wider version, and I have it over here on the table. You can look at it afterwards. But an interesting point to make here is that there's a day version and a night version, and they both are exactly the same file. The only difference is what color filament do you feed into the printer. And with one set of colors, you get the day version, and the other set of colors, you get the night version. Snakeskin, a lot of good, interesting options there. So I picked one, and this is what I got. I'm not completely satisfied with this. And again, it turns out that the colors I have are a limiting factor, but pretty reasonable. Most of you will be familiar with the work of Joseph Albers, who, among other things, did over 1,000 paintings of nested squares with different colors, just to examine the interplay of the colors. And so my mental experiment here was, well, suppose instead of squares, it was cubes. And okay, this is one way it might have worked. Here again, I'm not real pleased with this set of colors, but I could change the colors and get something good out of this, I think. When we visited a museum in Tucson, I saw a display of a cross-section of a rattlesnake rattle, and I thought, oh, that's a nice design. And I thought, well, let's see whether something could be done with that. So this is the current version. Not exactly what I had in mind. I'm going to work on that some more, but it's an interesting design. Brushes. What can you do with brushes? Well, a 3D printer like this can't do lots of tiny bristles. That's out of the question. So it has to be something distantly related. And so I did something distantly related. And I think it works pretty well. Red buds, I love the early buds of the red bud tree. And I thought, I'll do something with that. And I did. And again, my colors just didn't capture what the red bud is like. So I'm not happy with that. I'm okay with the design, but I'm not happy with the colors. In what is now southern Mexico, before the Europeans arrived, there was a thriving culture called Zapotec, and they made these carved flat limestone slabs called stele. And so that was interesting. I thought I would try something based on that. And I got this. And this is an interesting use of the printer because this is printed all in one run. It's like a 3-layer sandwich. You print the white layer, stop the printer, print the blue, start it up again, and then the third layer is white once more. So you have to stop and change filaments in the middle, but it's all done as one print file. So that was the only one I've done using that approach. So that gives you a little of the history behind these particular earrings. And I have an endless set of ideas for what I could do. And so I'm going to very quickly run you through a few ideas, and you can think about what you might do if you were faced with a design problem of earrings based on these ideas. So winter buds and leaf scars of various trees. Frank Lloyd Wright stained glass. Weird seeds. Acoma pottery. Various kinds of weaves. Dragonflies. Colorful architecture. The nautical alphabet. Cell towers. Mondrian paintings. Houses in Bermuda. Inuit designs. The Grand Canyon mapped. Quilts. Ben Nicholson collages. So that gives you an idea of what I might do. So I welcome questions now, and you'll have an opportunity to come up here. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. It isn't just earrings. You can do, obviously, more or less anything with this equipment. And I have done a few other things. Let me show you a couple. So my wife, she does alcohol ink paintings, and these little bottles were getting all over the place and disorganized. So I made her a bunch of little boxes that were the right size to hold the bottles for her 3D inks and 3D alcohol inks. And so she now has a supply of those, I don't know, 5 or so, to hold all the different colors that she has. And we have a bird feeder that's difficult to fill. Some of you have the same model. When you take the top off and you try to put the seeds down in it, they get all over the place because the inside part that holds the seeds doesn't come all the way up to the top. And so the seeds go out the sides. Well, here's a funnel that is the perfect size for that bird feeder. And you can't buy one of these. You have to make one. And so that's another example. I've done a few other little projects around the house. Fundamentally, though, it's all about the earrings. Okay, that's what I have to say. Any questions? Hold on a second. There's a mic coming. Gina? That's okay.
The Gray Hills earrings, it looked to me as if there might have been some embossing on the left earring. Is that is there? Or did I just not see?
There was no intentional embossing on those earrings, but embossing is certainly something that it's easy to do. And that reminds me of another thing to show you. So I decided to make some of my own earring cards. I mean, you can buy earring cards for displaying earrings. And I did them by 3D printing. And I decided I needed a company name. And so I invented the name Earring Engineering. And it's not exactly embossed. It's actually cut out of the cards. So, but it could just as easily have been embossed or raised. All of that is pretty easy to do with this technology.
Here, George. A quick question.
Yeah, Les.
Did you use CAD for the initial interpretation of all the samples that you had?
In each case, so I've used two different CAD packages. The one I'm currently using that I showed you in the video, the way it basically works is you do a two-dimensional drawing, and then you work from that to extend in various directions or rotate or copy. And I use that for everything now. So the software that you saw in the video is essentially all I use, but it's pretty complicated, and the software I used to use is a much simpler one and will do most of what the complicated one does. Yeah.
So the slicer actually could take different applications in there.
Well, so the slicer, so there's two different pieces of software. The design software, which in this case is called Fusion 360, is what I actually create the shapes in. The slicer merely takes those 3D models and makes them into layers.
Okay.
And the layers are what the printer needs.
Okay, thank you.
In the little insets, as for example, on the lower row, the second one in from the right, the little T's. Does the same program that designs the outer part also design the inner part, or do you have to figure out what the dimensions are going to be and tell it?
You have to figure that out with the program that I now use. So one of the problems with nested designs like that is everything has to fit inside perfectly. And if you do the exact same size, it won't fit. I mean, you have to leave a space. There has to be clearance. And with the software that I now use, there is an offset function that says, okay, take this line and offset it by a few tenths or a few hundredths of a millimeter, and you can figure out by trial and error how far it has to go, and you can then use the outside piece to design the inside piece. Does that answer your question?
So George, there used to be something called an SLA file. Is that what is the SLA file the thing you feed the slicer?
Yes, that's right. You can save, so there are several ways to save a 3D model and put it in the slicer, and SLA is one of those, and that's the one I usually use. Yeah. I should mention a couple other things about this printer. You can see that there's those of you who can see it can see that there's a spool of white filament feeding into it as it stands. That's a lot of filament. And so for earrings, you don't need that kind of volume, obviously. So you'll also see when you come up afterwards that I have some small coils of different colors. That's what I mostly use. But the filament on the spool is the normal way that people buy filament for these devices. I got so it's white is the only color that I have on a spool, and so I use it for all my prototyping, and all these things go through multiple versions because you can never get it right the first time. And I do the work initially in white, and when I think the shapes are about right, then I start trying the color with it. So when you go to the library, for example, they have big spools like that of each color that they have. They don't have anything smaller, and they only have a few colors. So that's a limitation. Before I had my own machine, I was using 3D printing at the Exton Library. I did all the work in white, and I took it home and painted it. And that's fine, works. But when you're trying to deal with little things that you can only work with tweezers and trying to get them painted and waiting for the paint to dry, it was no. Eventually I gave up on that and decided I'll use the colors I can get with filament. The filament itself is a type of plastic called PLA, which is made from cornstarch. So it's not a petroleum product, which I like. and you can do a lot of different kinds of plastic with a machine like this, but PLA is really nice because it's a plant product. It has a low melting point, which means things don't get real hot, and in the landfill someday it will ultimately decompose back into the carbon that the corn collected from the atmosphere in the first place. So it's a circular process in that sense.
Are all the colors that you have coils of that color? Or is there some way you can influence each other, or, mix them or something like that?
No, there's no way. So there are some technologies for that, but way out of my price range. So what I'm dealing with is material that I can get like this, and I have to live with what those colors are. Well, I have 30 or 40 colors. Unfortunately, they tend to be relatively bright and aggressive, not much, so they don't go in for pastels very much. And a lot of the subtler colors that I would like, I just can't get. So that's a limitation of the way I've chosen to do this. If I were willing to paint, I could mix whatever color I want, but life is too short.
How durable is the plastic that's used, George? Could you make, for example, machine parts, gears, or something that would run, that would?
Yeah. So this particular plastic, PLA, is not terribly durable. It's fairly strong. If you take one of these filaments and break it, it takes some effort. But it's I wouldn't trust it for anything that's really under stress. But you can get a lot of other varieties of plastic that are suitable for machines, and people do that. And then you can also get plastic filament that is, so the plastic is a binder, but it's full of metal. And you can get them with various metals. And then you can put it through an annealing furnace, and the plastic melts away and the metal melts together, and you come out with a metal part. So that's another possible process. And then there are some other metal printing techniques too. But you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Has anybody developed a process by which you could make an object, small object, I guess it would have to be here, out of, say, clay, and then you could somehow get that turned into something that you could put into your 3D printer to now print out things from it? Has that been done? And
well,
it's probably prohibitively expensive, but
there's a couple of approaches to that. The cheap way to do it actually is to make something out of clay and scan it. And they're relatively inexpensive scanners that'll do a good job of 3D scanning, done for hobbyists. So it's a few $100s. It might be $400 or $500 to get a scanner like that. But then it will scan any object and come up with a recipe that will allow your 3D printer to do it. That's one approach. The other thing that you can do is there are such things as 3D printers that will print clay, and then you can fire it in the usual way. And so that's another, if you do one at a time, but you can do anything. And there are 3D printers that will print molten glass. There are 3D printers that will print cement on such a scale that you can make houses with it. So, I mean, this is a crazy technology, a lot of stuff going on.
You mentioned before that, well, we were talking in private, that there are 3D printers that can mix colors, but that they're beyond our price range. Do you know how they work?
So there's actually several different versions of the technology for full color 3D printing. The least expensive one is a really interesting one to me, which is it takes sheets of paper, a ream of paper or so, and it has an inkjet printer, and it prints the edges of what will be the design on paper. Then it cuts out the paper and puts it all together. And so any colors, it knows where the outside is going to be. Any colors that you like can be printed onto that paper, and then it builds up those layers of paper in full color. So that's the simplest of the full color printers. There are several other technologies.
I just had another, I'm supposedly not allowed to say anything else, but I just wanted to say that I have a nephew who actually works for a company who does 3D printing of building pieces. It's a prefab building company. I asked him what kind of a material they use. He says, it's proprietary.
I just wanted to say that, as you can tell, it's very handy to have someone like George living in your cottage. And you've already seen several of the things he's done. But for a couple of weeks, when he was starting to get really into these earrings, I would just go to my closet and pull out something and say, George, would you match this? And I'd get another pair of earrings. I now have about 18 of them. But there's one thing that he did not mention that he's made for our house, which is before we came to Kendal, we wanted to find a table. We knew the space would be small, so we wanted to find a table that had like a drop leaf kind of thing that we could also open up to do jigsaw puzzles or have people over for dinner. So we found one on Craigslist. And it was just exactly what we were looking for, but unfortunately, it was missing two little pieces underneath it that enabled the two sides, the drop leaves, in other words, to slide back under. So when George's brother was visiting us, he whittled something out of wood that would work for one of the missing pieces. But when George got this printer, he went down under the table and figured out exactly what we needed. And he printed a piece that now fits perfectly. So this is a very handy thing.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for,
Just to toss it in, another way of making parts out of metal. Actually, I think I saw this recently on a YouTube video. The printer will actually do a pretty good job of printing with lost wax. And so you can make a part for lost wax casting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and lost wax involves creating a mold that will then be melted once you do the casting from it. So yeah, that requires a 3D printer that prints wax, and those exist. And if you haven't noticed, your dentist is now making your crowns with 3D printing, either on the premises or they send it off to a lab that uses 3D printing. That's how crowns are now done. Hold on, Kathleen.
Okay. Like when you're working with wood, you have splinters and rough edges and things like that. Is there an analogous situation in this? Do you have much finishing to do besides putting it together?
Not much, but there are little whiskers. It depends on the nature of the movements that the head has to make when it's printing, but it can leave little whiskers sticking out. And in fact, if you look closely at some of the earring cards that I have there, you may see a little bit of that. There is a method for curing that, which is pretty easy. And I just got what I needed to do it, which is if you apply a little heat with a heat gun, within a second or two, those little whiskers will basically vanish. And so I went to Walmart last week and got a heat gun. I haven't tried this yet, but people swear on YouTube that that this is the way to deal with that problem.
Thank you. I was thinking outside the box a little bit and thinking colleges would probably love to have earrings with their colors and their names. And if you were lobbying for a particular subject, it would be fun to have, for instance, ERA, things like that, because they would be attractive and people would ask you questions, which would be the idea.
Right. And I encourage you to go to the library and do exactly that. The only analogous thing that I've done that I can think of is when our nephew, who lives in Michigan, married a woman who lives in Nova Scotia. I made her a pair of earrings, one with stars, some stars and stripes, and the other one with a Canadian maple leaf on it. Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, yeah. So one final question. Can you buy these? The answer is no, but I have talked to Alma in the Gateway shop and she said, sure, we'll take some on consignment and see if they sell. So I will, so it's gonna be a little while because it's not a quick process, but and I have other things that I do, but they'll turn up in the Gateway shop. Put it on the website. Oh, that they're for sale? I think it's premature. Maybe once they're in there. Yeah. And there's the Christmas sale too. I'll probably bring some to that. Yeah. Can you work with submitted designs? Well, I'm going to encourage you to go to the library. We'll talk. Thank you.